You are not the first person to feel like the world is too loud, too crowded, too much. You are also not the first creature to collapse under those conditions, but you might be one of the last who can still do something about it. In 1968, a behavioral researcher named John B. Calhoun built a paradise, not for humans, for mice. He gave them unlimited food, unlimited water, no predators, no disease, perfect temperature. No reason whatsoever to struggle, and then he watched what happened. What followed was one of the most disturbing experiments in scientific history, not because of what the mice suffered, but because of what they chose. Calhoun called it Universe 25. It was the 25th attempt at building a mouse utopia, and just like the first 24, it ended the same way. Here is what happened. At first, everything looked like success. The mice reproduced. Population doubled, then doubled again. Within a year, there were over 2,000 mice in a space built for a few hundred. And then something cracked. Not the walls, not the food supply, something inside the mice. The most dominant males claimed the best territories and defended them with increasing ferocity. But here's where it gets strange. Most of the other males simply stopped trying. They withdrew. They gathered in the center of the habitat, sleeping in piles, grooming themselves obsessively, eating when food was available, doing nothing else. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. Perfectly groomed, physically healthy, behaviorally hollow. They had never been in a fight, never courted a female, never raised offspring. They existed. That was all. The females fared no better. Mothers began abandoning litters. Some became aggressive toward their own offspring. Birth rates fell, then plummeted. The population hit its peak at 2,200 and then began a slow, irreversible collapse. Not from plague, not from starvation, from the inside. By 1973, the last mouse died. The food bowls were still full. John Calhoun coined a term for what he witnessed: behavioral sink. A point where crowding and social complexity overwhelm the biological capacity to function, where animals stop doing the things that kept their species alive, not because they cannot, but because nothing in their environment demands it anymore. Now, here's the part that should make you pause. Calhoun himself believed he was not just studying mice. He said it explicitly. He published his findings in Scientific American in 1962 and titled one of his papers, "The Death Squared." He believed he had discovered a law that applied to any social species pushed past a certain threshold. Any species that eliminates the need to struggle, to compete, to bond in meaningful ways, and to endure hardship eventually loses the internal wiring that makes life worth living. And then the question that nobody wants to ask: what does modern life look like through that lens? Look at your environment. You have more food available than any human being in history. Delivered, processed, engineered to be impossible to stop eating. You have entertainment that adjusts in real time to keep you watching, frictionless, endless, optimized. You have every comfort your ancestors would have considered supernatural. No predators, no famine, no genuine physical danger most days. And yet, rates of depression have tripled since the 1990s, according to research published in the journal Psychological Medicine. Loneliness is now classified by the U.S. Surgeon General as a public health epidemic. Young men are withdrawing from education, from relationships, from the workforce at rates not seen before in recorded history. Young women report higher anxiety and lower life satisfaction than any generation measured, and birth rates across the developed world are falling off a cliff. If you are wondering whether Calhoun would recognize the modern world, the answer is yes, immediately. But here's something his experiment cannot fully explain, because mice are not humans, and that gap matters. Edward O. Wilson, the biologist and author of The Social Conquest of Earth, argued that human beings are wired differently from other social animals in one critical way. We have the capacity for eusociality, a kind of cooperation that goes far beyond survival instinct. We build things for people we will never meet. We maintain traditions across centuries. We feel genuine purpose in contributing to something larger than our immediate comfort. That wiring does not disappear in abundance, but it does go quiet when nothing activates it. That's the nuance Calhoun's mice could not show him. A mouse in paradise has no internal resistance, no concept of meaning to reach for. You do. Before we go further, if this video is making you think about your own life in ways you did not expect, that's the point. Subscribe and stay for what comes next, because the rest of this video is about what the mice who survived did differently, and there were a few. Calhoun noticed that some mice in Universe 25 never fully surrendered. They were the ones who stayed on the margins, who fought through the chaos even when it was costly, who maintained something resembling normal bonding behavior even when the majority around them had given up. They were not physically stronger, they were behaviorally different. Calhoun called them the probers, animals that kept engaging with real challenges even when avoidance was freely available. Behavioral psychologist Martin Seligman would later name a related phenomenon in humans. He called it learned helplessness, the state that occurs when a creature experiences a situation where their actions have no effect, and then they stop trying in all future situations, even when their actions could matter. Seligman originally demonstrated this in dogs exposed to unavoidable shocks, but the pattern is visible everywhere in human psychology when challenge disappears long enough. The nervous system stops expecting its efforts to count, and then it stops making them. The antidote is not suffering for its own sake, let that be clear. The antidote is the presence of obstacles that are real, surmountable, and connected to something you care about. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying the mental states that humans report as most alive and most satisfying. He called the peak state flow. And flow is not found in ease. It's found exactly at the edge of your current capability. It requires something that can push back. Every system of meaning that has persisted across human history understood this. Struggle is not a flaw in the design. For biological creatures shaped by millions of years of surviving difficulty, struggle is the mechanism through which identity forms, relationships deepen, and life gains weight. Calhoun's mice had food, they had shelter, they had safety, they had everything except necessity. And necessity, it turns out, is what kept them alive in every way that mattered. So what does a human do with this? You do not need to manufacture suffering, but you might need to notice what you've been avoiding. The conversation that requires real vulnerability, the project with no guaranteed outcome, the friendship that demands consistency rather than convenience, the physical challenge your body was built to handle, the skill that takes long enough to learn that you might fail before you succeed. These are not obligations, they are the conditions under which your full self actually shows up. John Calhoun watched 2,000 mice forget how to be mice. They did not suffer hunger. They suffered something harder to name and harder to fix. They suffered the removal of everything that made life feel necessary. You live in a world that's never been better at removing necessity. That's worth sitting with. Tonight, when you flip through options and feel a familiar emptiness despite every comfort being available, remember the full food bowls. Remember the groomed and hollow beautiful ones. And then ask yourself what challenge you've been putting off, because that challenge is not in your way. It might be the way.